Next is another person who is intimately involved in this whole issue for a long time, Ms. Rochelle Nakhid. If you know anything about refugees in Trinidad and Tobago, you will know her name, of the Living Water community. And of course, we know, Farid has mentioned, the NGO, Catholic NGO, who's been working for years on this issue. She also worked with refugees in the USA and Trinidad and Tobago. She has coordinated refugee case management, including trafficked persons and Cuban Haitian entrants across 4 agencies in Texas, and worked in quality assurance of refugee resettlement. She's now the coordinator of the Living Water community, and that's for the past 6 years. She oversees refugee protection activities and urban humanitarian programming, and advocates regionally, responsible for networking and partnership in Latin America and the Caribbean. She was a BA in International Relations from Agnes Scott College in Georgia, USA, and MSc in Global Studies from the U.W.I. She speaks French, Spanish, and Portuguese. I didn't know that. And a good friend of the Faculty of Law. Thank you, Rochelle.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. Mr. Schoon, you put me in a position here. You gave me a tough act to follow. But given that you've mentioned Mr. Mara, I will tell everybody Mr. Mara is doing quite well. He did graduate from the University of the West Indies, and he's actually a musician right now in Jamaica. He got citizenship, and actually he visited us, I think it was last year. So he's doing quite well. He's one of the more successful refugee stories that we've seen over the years. He was definitely not the first refugee. We had some Russians some years ago, and Iraqis, all of whom were successfully resettled at a time when, we had a handful of refugees. I think in the past before 2013 or 2012, it was something like 20, 30 refugees that we were seeing. So, everyone was able to get resettled, and unfortunately, that's not the dynamic that we have today. So I had a speech, but given that we still have so many people to speak, I'll keep it short. And I do apologize that we won't actually have the video, but I will invite everyone to our event on Saturday at the Government Campus Plaza, where we'll be showing a film called Human Flow. I believe it starts at 5 p.m. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong. 5:30 p.m. And there will be a reception to follow. So I hope that you all can come out on Saturday and support us in this endeavor. And definitely, I think you will learn a lot as well. So again, I'm very, very honored and humbled to have the opportunity to address you today on World Refugee Day. I think we come together to honor, and true to our Catholic identity, we have heeded the call to love the stranger as ourselves and to welcome, protect, promote, and integrate migrants and refugees. Our solidarity with those forced to flee their homes is a great responsibility, and we've definitely acted on this in partnership with the UN Refugee Agency and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course other esteemed partners like the University of the West Indies. I'm really glad that, we talked about Professor Belantoine talked about scholar activism and academia and what is the role of academia. I think when we think about protection, I think one of the most important things is that it's not just one actor who's responsible. It's not just the state. It's their primary responsibility. But what we really need is a whole of society approach to protection. And that includes academia. It includes NGOs. It includes the international organization. It includes the faith-based communities who play a vital, vital role in our communities. So definitely the involvement of all of these key actors is certainly what makes a very much more comprehensive and effective response. So I wanted to talk very, very briefly, I think, on this humanitarian development nexus, which I think Professor Belantoine also addressed. Given the challenges that we're seeing facing our region for the first time ever, I mean, we've never, as a region, had this kind of displacement crises to deal with. It's new, it's unprecedented, and I think it's easy to say, we can look at other contexts and adapt to suit, But really, we're small island nation states, and I think we need to be tailoring our responses and adapting appropriate protection responses that consider those very unique small island dynamics. And it's never happened before that we've had small island states having to treat with this kind of displacement crises. And so it's definitely a challenge for all of us actors, again, this whole of society approach, to find ways to work together to address this problem collectively. So, of course, in any situation where we have persons in need of protection, we would expect that the state would adapt or adopt appropriate pragmatic protection-oriented responses. So we want them to allow access to asylum systems or access to temporary protection arrangements, to work permits, for example, as in Mercosur. We've been seeing that they've been allowing a lot of Venezuelans to find ways to integrate in society without having necessarily to resort to the asylum system. We want states to guarantee non-refoulement, but also we want that they afford refugees rights. And as we would have heard earlier, many of those rights aren't actually afforded: the right to education, the right to work. And this is pretty detrimental to the dignity of refugees, and one of the most important things, I think, or most important principle-based responses to the humanitarian crises that we face. And I think it's important as well that we challenge some of the common assumptions that tend to be associated with refugees, in terms of them being a burden on economies, in terms of them being some sort of homogenous population, being maybe sometimes technologically illiterate or unskilled persons, or very much dependent on humanitarian assistance. And that's not the case. In fact, refugees, they make very positive contributions to host economies. They actually can be job creators. They can create employment opportunities, and we've seen that in many instances, for example in Uganda, where the refugee population is the one that actually there's so many entrepreneurs, and they actually hire locals to work in their business. We've seen that refugees can be economically diverse, and even within them there's different levels of internal inequality that they come from, and that they can engage in a wide range of livelihood activities. They are both users and in many cases creators of technology. They actually, in some societies, they have a higher level of internet use and mobile phone use than the general population. And while refugees do in fact receive humanitarian assistance, it's never enough to meet their need. As any of the refugees in this room or in this country will tell you, it's never enough to meet need. Yet somehow they manage to become dependent on their social relationships. They find other ways to support themselves, and we have to support them in doing that. So I think in thinking about the humanitarian development nexus, I think it's really important that we remember that our responsibility should be to adapt policies to refugees and to their needs versus adapting refugees to our existing policies. So we should be finding ways to consider what those specific needs are, what those specific vulnerabilities are, and adapting appropriate responses to them given the context that we're operating in. And again, for a small island state, I think that also requires some very special and creative and innovative thinking to do that. So again, just want to go back again to the whole of society approach to protection as I wrap up, and say that very much appreciative of the university and our partnership over the years, and we hope that we can continue to engage in initiatives like this. When our humanity is constantly challenged, I think our job is to creatively and painstakingly embrace and defend human dignity, and that's certainly what we can only hope to do as a whole of society. Thank you.